have had a pretty big day during the morning. We had the representative of the Public Information Access Agency, and we talked about many topics. We have several presentations now in the afternoon. I have Danilo Daneda, who is a professor at the Brazilian Institute, our friend Luca Belli. Hello, Luca. Coordinator of the Technology Center in Brazil, Jimena Moreno from Mexico, a professor at the CIDE Mexico, and Jocelyn, with whom I organized the school in Panama. I think that she has a new position now, so I'm going to give the floor to Karina, who is going to be our moderator. She's from Bolivia. Welcome, Karina. Thank you to the members of the panel. I'm sorry for the delay, as Olga was saying, and you're going to have 10 minutes for your presentation each, but let me give you a recap from this morning. We had a representative of the Agency for Data Protection in the morning, and now we're going to see that data, which is the heart of the digital economy, has another fundamental right that has to do with information access. So what we're going to do is we're going to have an overview. Danilo, we haven't met before. We also have Luca Belli and Jimena and Jocelyn. We have shared with Jocelyn the Latin American Network for IT. And I would like you to give us an overview from your countries, because since this is about data governance from the personal perspective, so the regional perspective. So let's talk about privacy, data protection, and also public policies as regards data governance. Let's start with Danilo. Danilo, I don't know if you have a presentation to show us, or if you would like to just speak. I do have a presentation. It's a brief one, and then I can answer questions. Thank you. I'm going to try speaking in Spanish. Thanks for the invitation, Olga Cavalli, and all the members of the school. And the topic that I'm going to talk today has to do with regional perspectives as regards data governance. And I'm going to give you an overview of the data protection development in the Latin American region, and specifically the next steps that probably we are going to be following as regards the Data Protection Acts and regulations, which are key for governance and for AI. We are seeing the first regulations in the region that are starting to be discussed seriously. So as regards data protection in Latin America, in the last 10-15 years, we have seen an incredible development of the topic. In blue, we see the countries that do have the Data Protection Act, and a huge part of Latin America had a Data Protection Act. In 2018, we got the passing of the Data Protection Act, and it is interesting to see that there was, like, in general terms, a legal framework in Latin America as regards convergence in data protection acts, which are mostly compatible. Some may be a little bit older than others, but we can see that Argentina, which was the first country passing the act in the region, now has been discussing the act in the last month and started a public consultation process for a new data protection act that is going to replace the 2000 act. The same Uruguay has had the act for 14 years, Mexico 12, Peru 11, Brazil only 4 years. So we also have, for example, Chile, which the Data Protection Act was passed some years ago, but it's not a general law. So Brazil has passed the law a while ago, but in the last couple of years, since the law entered into force, there was an amendment of this, and the discussion has been going on.
Creo que estamos empezando a caminar en la cuestión. Esse desenlace na América Latina não é propriamente algo
This is not something that has a regional standard. It seems to have been a particular development in the region. For example, in Habeas Data Institute that was developed in Brazil, there was not some kind of consolidation between the data protection ideas and practices. What we recently were able to see was the influence of international standards and some adapted standards for the region, for example, with the influence of data protection standards from the Euro-American Data Protection Act. Now that we have had a consolidation of the Data Protection Act in the region and in the world, we can see that what can be developed with data protection would be like the base or the starting point for other regulations that require a little bit more attention towards other matters. One of them is AI, and there are many others. For example, cybersecurity. I don't have much time, so I want to mention the importance of the Data Protection Acts for what we try to do with AI, for example. These are topics that are related. How data protection, which is something that is a comprehensive matter for the public and private sector. And in the case of AI, there are different data protection acts in Latin America which include regulations that are applied, for example, to AI. For example, automated decisions, which are part of our data protection legislation in Brazil, are in the Article 20, and these are rules that are going to be validated and are not rules that are specifically connected with data protection, but with data management for being used with mechanisms of AI, for example, and automated decisions, and that can grant some rights, not specifically about data, but on how we treat those legislations. And what those regulations try to cover have to do with, for example, transparency of the mechanism, the decision-making mechanism, and the review of the decisions. That is included in Article 20 and in many data protection legislations. And that was included in previous laws. In Brazil now, we have a huge possibility in a short time for the country to pass the general law on AI. Last year, we passed the legislation on artificial intelligence that was passed because it was perceived that there was no artificial intelligence general legislation nowhere in the world. So there are some proposals in Europe, but those are not legislation. So in Brazil, we decided to have a commission in charge of direct to guide the drafting of the legislation that the senators are going to use as the base for the discussions that they are going to have next year. The current situation in Brazil is that on December 7th, 2022, we are going to have a draft and it is probably going to be considered next year. And we believe that we are going to continue working on this, and in Brazil we are going to have the first discussions on the artificial intelligence legislation. For 2023. Thanks for the time, and now I'm going to give the floor to Karina. Thanks, Danilo, for sticking to the time. Now we are going to give the floor to our second speaker, that is Luca Belli, who is the coordinator of the Society and Technology Center. Thanks, Karina and Olga, for the invitation. I'm going to give my presentation in English because my Spanish is not as good. It's good for maybe a talk with my friends, but not so much so as to give a presentation on governance. But next year, I promise you that I'm going to study in order to give my presentation in Spanish. I'm going to share my screen.
So can you all confirm you can read, you can see my PowerPoint presentation? All right. Yes. So I'm just taking this off because I'm hearing myself speaking in Spanish. And my presentation, as you can see, it's a more global topic than what you may expect from the previous specialists and the next ones. I guess some of you may wonder why I'm talking about this, but I will explain this in a couple of seconds. So before we enter into the details of the presentation, just a couple of words about my institution where I work. FGV, so I work at the law school of FGV, which is one of the main academic institutions in Brazil, and also now currently ranked as the third most influential think tank in the world out of more than 11,000. I coordinate the Center for Technology and Society, and I direct this project called CyberBRICS, which is particularly interesting for me and about which I'm going to speak today, which analyzes the digital policies of the BRICS grouping, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. All the publications, studies, events that we have developed over the past almost 5 years are in free access on this website, cyberbrics.info. And so why BRICS countries are particularly relevant? Well, first, because more than 40% of global population lives in the BRICS countries, so 3.2 billion individuals, and more than 2 billion internet users. So actually it's about around 50% of the internet population living in these 5 countries. But then there is another very interesting update regarding the BRICS, especially for Argentina, which is the fact that Argentina has been invited to the BRICS Plus, so this extended part of the BRICS summit, where the President Fernandez participated 2 months ago, and subsequently they expressed their willingness to join this club that we can see as a sort of G7 or G5 in this case, of the global south. So a club governance model for the emerging world and the majority world, if you want. So the majority of the world that is not maybe well represented in clubs like the G7 that we usually see. And a very interesting point to understand about the BRICS is that it has not been developed to copy and paste other institutions, but to do things differently, as former President of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva mentioned, and also to do things differently in order not to be dependent on traditional bodies, especially financial bodies and traditional global governance mechanism that may not see the interests of the global south as a priority in some cases. Now, how the digital policies enter into the picture of this group? Well, they entered with sort of very aggressive entrance in 2013 due to the Snowden revelations that also include illegal wiretapping of former President of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff. So the consequence of this was, well, not only the promotion of this UN resolution on the privacy of digital age, but also the adoption in Brazil of the Marco Civil Internet, the Brazilian civil rights framework for the internet, and also the start of the second consultation that then led to the adoption of the Brazilian General Data Protection Law. But also the BRICS level, for the first time in 2013, the BRICS leaders include cybersecurity as a key priority in their declaration at the end of their summit. And what is interesting here to see is that they start coordinate their actions in a way that is very different from typical coordination mechanism, governance mechanism based, for instance, on treaties. They start coordinating their actions with building a joint working group on ICT security to exchange information and good practices or bad practices, depending on how you consider them. They define a joint memorandum of understanding to have joint research and development initiatives, and they build their own institutions led by the BRICS, the new development banks, so a development bank. So it's a coordination based on exchange of information, joint research, and joint funding. It's a different model, but very interesting to understand. It's a very good example of what in internet governance vernacular we call enhanced cooperation. It's a process that has never been clearly defined by the UN, but it exists since the Tunis agenda, so the World Summit of Information Society. I'm sure you have heard about this in the previous classes. And this is something that the BRICS themselves have explicitly acknowledged. So their commitment to cooperate on digital governance issues, in particular on data protection, data regulation, also because, let's not be naive, it's not only a question of fundamental rights, of course, it's a question of enormous value economic value, strategic value that you generate processing data, and personal data are processed by persons. And if 40% of those people live in your countries, you're actually sitting on a gold mine. So it's a very strategic and also economic vision of data regulation that enters at the highest level of the declaration since the Xiamen Declaration 5 years ago, where they commit to work together on cybersecurity and data protection frameworks. And so how are the BRICS regulating data protection? You can find several papers, reports, and even this very nice interactive tool that I'm showing here on cyberbrics.info, where we compare these regulations. We have been doing this over the past years with updating enormously, and I will mention this in a couple of minutes, these regulations, because a lot of innovation has happened over the past 5 years, especially. This paper, it's actually the last publication we added on the website. It will be published officially in 2 weeks by the Oxford University Press. It's a paper I've co-drafted with my friend Danilo Domeda, that also is here today, on how this convergence of digital policies leading to a sort of legal interoperability, so compatibility of frameworks in data protection, with regard to data protection in the BRICS countries. So why we are arguing this? On the one hand, you can see, and it will take only a couple of minutes to finish my presentation. So on the one hand, you see major advancements in the BRICS countries, also as Danilo was mentioning, that happened primarily over the past 5 years. So just to give you a very quick picture, Brazil adopted a new general law, created a new data protection regulator, and data protection became a fundamental right only in the past 4 years. Russia adopted a new data localization provisions that have been copied by other countries around the world, and the new sovereign internet law, which is a different kind of development, but worth considering. India also has acknowledged privacy as a fundamental right, is preparing a new data protection bill, and has created a new data architecture, which is extremely interesting because is a protocol, is an internet protocol way of organizing personal data. So not through legislation, but through technology. China has adopted a new civil code with rights, data protection and privacy, a new general data protection law, the people, a new data security law, new sectoral laws in a host of different sectors. We have a publication also on this coming up soon. And last but not least, South Africa has enacted the new general data protection law and created a new regulator, the information regulator. And then there is increasing convergence, also because many of them, let's say, take inspiration from the same model. So we have shared principles in all the countries, a shared set of individual rights in all countries, a very compatible set of obligations for the data controllers and processors, so the entity that decide how data are managed. There are convergent approaches on data transfers that are allowed only when the country where the legislation is enacted allows it. So consider the third country as having an adequate protection and therefore allow the transfer. And then there is an increasing shared concern with data security in the context of cybersecurity. And this became very evident only 2 years ago at the BRICS summit of India. This picture that looks very much like a Tarantino movie advertisement is the BRICS family picture of the 2021 summit, and where the BRICS leaders acknowledged their willingness to cooperate, to implement established legal frameworks of cooperation and intergovernmental agreements. So this is a considerable step that was never mentioned before and was reiterated this year at at the summit chaired by China, where Argentina was also invited in the second part of the summit. Here you can see also the fragment of the declaration where this was reiterated. And just to conclude, legal interoperability, so this kind of compatibility is something that may create a lot of advantages, but also has a lot of challenges. There is a specific paper on this that is going to be published in the report of the World Internet Conference, it is the World Conference on Internet Governance organized by the Cyberspace Administration of China, that will be published in 3 weeks. And also, if you are interested in how this will evolve, I suggest you stay tuned and you check our website, because we have several publications, books, and special issues that will be released in the next couple of months about this issue. Thank you very much, and sorry if I took too much to finish my presentation. Thank you very much. Yes.
Gracias. Gracias, Luca, por respetar también el tiempo. Vamos a dar paso ahora a...
For sticking to the time now, I'm going to give the floor to Jimena Moreno, who is going to give us a perspective from the financial point of view. I don't know if you are going to share a presentation or if you are just going to speak.
Or shall we discuss it over a Q&A, Jimena? Let me see if I can share the screen. I can share the screen. Yes. First and foremost, I would like to thank you for the invitation, for allowing me to speak here, especially Olga Cavalli, for having invited me to participate in this conference. First and foremost, I would like to give you an overview of what internet governance is like in Mexico and then in the region. We're part of the Convention 108 for the Council of Europe for personal data protection, automated systems, and its additional protocol. Just a few companies have incorporated this. I believe Uruguay, Costa Rica pretty soon. Mexico is part or member party of this convention that requires further protection of personal data. Now, personal data protection, just like privacy, our human rights are enshrined in our Constitution as part or as such. And just like in the right to internet access. Now, based on these premises, out of all the evolution that we have seen in technology and in artificial intelligence, I would like to describe what the situation is of Mexico is like. That is the financial digital system. And I bring this to the table precisely because the use of artificial intelligence and data science has been evolving and has impacted on the market. We have noticed that there's a new change in the market. Since we create new financial products by reducing costs, we create more skills, and the regulation of the marketplace also plays a key role. Now, with the offer of financial services in Mexico and in other parts of Latin America because of the pandemic, and right before, we started with online banking, the fintech companies that have been evolving with artificial intelligence that are paramount. But as good technologies, we have cybersecurity, identity theft, personal data protection. So we came to realize then that when we started development of artificial intelligence and large disruptions that we have witnessed in technology, this brings about inequalities that are pretty significant. That's why I will bring this to the table. Here I brought some statistics that revealed in Mexico the use of the financial systems. And let me call your attention because this will lead to interesting reflections. Savings are in riches, as are lying behind. There's a structural difference against women. Here we can see a discrimination against women. In Mexico, the population increased by 31% out of a total of 7.8 million people. That's between 2019 and 21. These were people that are out in the formal market without any savings, so there is some kind of exclusion, and 4.5 million of them are women. Now, when we consider technology in the formal market, Men share by 70%, by women's share increased by 15%. So there's an important digital divide. First, women are excluded out of the financial markets because they have no savings. But when we include them through technology, instead of bridging the gaps through technology, what we found or came to realize is that men's share increased 70% in contrast to 15% of women. The gender-based divides are in many savings because women saved part of their salaries, a part of their wages, and much less than men. And they allocate those resources or savings to food and basic services. This is important, you may be wondering, because why does this have to do with technology? Well, technology may close these gaps. And what we are seeing is larger participation in the economy, especially in the formal part. We talk about pension fund retirement. We talk about decent standard of living benefits, social benefits. So we have to use technology for inclusion. And with the case of digital financial applications, men increased by 170% more than women. Women accounted for 70% of the increase. So it was 5 times more women taking a sample than men, and they increased 170 more than women. And payroll has important differences, since the labor increase or the job increase accounted by 16% in men, but only 2% in women when it comes to home banking and technology. We are still even further displaced in line with the statistics. On top of that, when we talk about the formal job creation, and when we start asking for loans, there's an increase. I mean, there are people that are out of the market by 18% and isolated to smaller populations. We can witness that the gap is even deeper, it's even larger. So what's the most important thing here? Well, that we should include the most vulnerable sectors of society. In this case, the women are vulnerable sectors of society like technology and applications, because we see women behind, the elderly especially. The same thing goes for the elderly, because it's women where they start witnessing this digital divide. Public policy and data governance for inclusion is not really effective. It's not really considered. As a matter of fact, we don't create governance or guidance with gender-based guidance or rules. And as technology and the economy evolve so rapidly, we are going to have a setback or a delay in this kind of concepts. What happens with personal data right now, or personal data protection? This survey has revealed that the vulnerabilities against identity, savings, credit card cloning are increasingly significant or increasingly more. And this hits women because these women do not file claims in the bank subsidiaries. It's the men who fight for their savings or identity thefts. Here we're speaking not only financial education, but also a technological education, because the most vulnerable sectors of society is not only women. I am talking about Aboriginal peoples, the elderly. Well, they're totally unprotected because of this technology. So the regulation of these services are not considering this part and parcel that is getting behind or is leaving behind. Even though technology is breaking the glass and opening new paradigm shift, opening markets, and creating a better GDP, at the same time it's creating inequalities. So I wanted to bring this to the table. This survey reveals that internet governance and public policy should close not only the digital divide, it's not enough. Closing the digital divide is just a major step for everybody to have equal access. However, learning the use of this technology and include the most vulnerable sectors of society will require or will imply the democratization of artificial intelligence use and use of technology. If we follow suit, we're going to have deeper gaps. Because of the pandemic and the statistics that has been revealing, we notice that inequalities are rampant and we're still widening this gap. So if we continue this course by creating technology, it is important, like home banking is very important, like for example, having loans, bank loans. This is leading to external factors that are totally detrimental to users. So it's very important not only to using it, but also the same but also training these people. And I haven't seen this much discussion in congresses or conferences when we talk about the 108 Convention, law data protection, and especially with the TELMEC, that is the free trade agreement with the United States and with Canada. There's a specific chapter on electronic commerce, and that deals with data or personal data protection as an important item of the agenda for North America. However, I haven't seen who is set aside from this technology. And what we've seen in congresses and in the academic world, has to consider gender-based opportunities, including the most vulnerable sectors of society. If not, we're going to have deeper inequalities, and they will be impossible to eradicate. So technology should be a factor for growth, for equality, for creating the same opportunities, equal opportunities. So what I've shown here so far reflect or reveal many things, and that is why I wanted to mention this. Discussions should also address other things like other stakeholders. So technology could be inclusive, could involve a human factor. If not, we're going to be struggling with inequalities that are going to be deeper and opening this divide even further. So far, so good. I think that I have covered most of the items. But the takeaway is this. In the financial digital sector, after the survey that I just brought to the table, there's a wider gap in terms of savings, having access to loans, especially access to home banking. So if we're set aside some sectors, not only are we setting aside savings, but also formal jobs and be part of a formal economy to have access to social security. So a large part of the population we feel that is excluded. Internet governance cannot look the other way. To develop this, it has to include technology. However, we should protect with inclusion to all the sectors, half of the population, that is women, and those people that are unprotected or uncovered by technology. Because if not, it's going to be a tool of inequality if we start looking the other way. I would like to thank Jimena Moreno, Professor of CIDE, and right now I'll give the floor to Jocelyn Post-Castro, President of GenderTech of Panama. Good afternoon, Karina. Thank you very much. I would like to extend my gratitude to Olga and Adrian for organizing this. That has gathered so many stakeholders, so many people that are interested in getting to know how we handle this or how we tackle the issues related to internet governance. Let's do this as a discussion. I'm gonna do it in Panama and data protection and how this is affecting access, because what Jimena has done is a great introduction. We are replicating these key messages, the key message across the region. We have the same stories, but with different locations, basically. Let's see if we can start with a story. It happened to many of us, to many of the girls. We wrote in diaries, we expressed our feelings, what happened today in our daily lives, and we became frustrated if somebody read the diary. However, now what happens is the opposite. We publish everything on the internet and we post, especially those that have access, and we become frustrated when that is overlooked. So it's a dilemma, the way we changed. That information is either read or not read in an openly fashion. And as digital citizens, we provide this data without knowing what the impact is going to be like. But it has a reason. On what grounds? Who is teaching us that that information that is owned by any citizen, it's a right of their own, it's an asset? Nobody tells us. I mean, there's no awareness that is raised where the citizen is told that providing that personal data is a right where he may decide whether he'll provide it or furnish it or not, to what extent, what is the deadline, what is the purpose of providing that data, etc. And this has led that we became a black market of information where this is dealt and the human right is infringed, because we want to protect any personal data that identifies or relates to a person specifically. So we want to we want to have the right to promote and to exercise that right. We passed the law of personal data protection dating back to 2019. And let me say that we had previous regulations that intended to protect, by some way or another, data protection. For example, Section 42 in our Constitution provides that everybody has the right to have access to this personal information as it is contained in databases to protect, to suppress information. So it's not only legislation that has passed or that was enshrined in the Constitution or treaties like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the United Nations. So data protection is very important because we went further with governments with the transparency law number 6, when we started addressing habeas data, and we have some confidential information that is being dealt and which data has been reserved or safeguarded. However, there's another cluster of legislations that tell Panama the way that they should go about with personal data protection, and that is eventually leads to the 205 data protection law. Even though this law is new for Panama, we were one of the last countries that joined the legislation of data protection. And this leads to raising awareness and providing the necessary training, not only of the citizenry, but also corporations and the public sector of the way they should treat the data and the policies that should be made in this regard. As a corollary, I can tell you that there was a lot of personal data protection. And recently, a proposal where an amendment was made by the telecommunication or the communication media, because they considered that every time you have the data protection is in line with the right of the journalist, understanding that there's an awareness of the right of expression or freedom to speech and personal data rights. They need to coexist in a well-balanced way, requiring training for these sectors to get to know the appropriateness or the proper use of information to maintain personal data as a human right of third generation. Let me take this concept because we are talking about the development of artificial intelligence and the way we treat this large volume of data or big data that can lead, if we don't develop artificial intelligence effectively, to discrimination. And that is why in Jimena's presentation, we notice a very good introduction because there's a reality that should be widely discussed and that should be debatable, and that is in connection with the digital divide. Why? Because data protection cannot be seen from the perspective on the use of technology, but on the use of the basic technology, and that is writing on paper. We do have different divides, and even though Jimena described them, that were related to women, there's digital divide, there are geographical divides, where we can extrapolate important data because usually big cities have more access to technology rather than far corners of the country. And within the urban centers, we have hot spots that they do not have access to technology. And if I have or run into a situation where I have an individual that is a minor and that lives in a hotspot and cannot go to school because there's a gang right across the street and kills the schoolboy, and he cannot have access to tele-education because he doesn't have any access to technology, there we have a situation or a challenge that needs to overcome. As Jimena well explained in all those topics related to gender-based equality, women are seen in situations as housewives, with elderly care, with family care, and in many of the policies we do not include, because as a matter of fact we have clear statistics, we do not include these women as professionals, and they are not taught, or we don't explain to women that they can contribute to the technology world. That is why we conduct workshops where we invite women to take part in the technology world, in cybersecurity, since we fall prey, given some situations like extortion, sharing information, whether it is private and consented, and some other actions. Now, the economic aspect, as Jimena well explained, is very important. Why is that? Because if I had a chance to explain, and as a matter of fact, this was a challenge that we came to overcome a few years ago. And we were told that we were promoting technology, but what happens with the poor that they do not have access to that technology? And what happens to the citizen that doesn't have anything to eat, not even for breakfast? And you intend to teach them technology. And later we're going to see the citizens and the takeaway. We do not see any other vulnerable group in technology than the elderly. They fall prey of malfeasances since they are not aware of technologies, and they fall prey of malfeasance. They are discriminated because they don't have any access to information or to news, or they do not have access to communicate sometimes with their relatives, telecommunication, telemedicine, and to express their own opinions sometimes. It is important to determine who are these vulnerable groups because, yes, we are discussing that women are part of this sector and minors as well. However, this scenario or the scope should be broadened and include the elderly, people with disabilities, people that are in poverty, migrants, because our region has received a barrage or waves of immigration that come from Argentina to get to the United States. And there's a large number of situations that are probably have come to turn into nightmares. There are abuse, people die, abuse of human rights, and there are statistics that are never told. There are policies that are never developed for illegal migrants. There's also people that are part or fall prey of offenses or crimes, or people that are deprived of their own freedom. It may happen that they may be vulnerable, and you may have cross or transversal vulnerability. I could have the elderly that could belong to a minority, or people with disability, or somebody that is deprived of their freedom, that is a minor and is poor at the same time. So we should establish the necessary policies to implement these actions, and we shouldn't set aside technology development, maintaining the digital divide, and maintaining that digital divide into consideration, as it was previously mentioned. Well, you had a chance to analyze during the pandemic to see how we approach the technological applications. In Panama, we had a boy that tried to pick up the signal and climb the tree to try to go online. And that was replicated in the media. And the same example replicated in Siberia, in Italy, in Argentina, where everybody was interested in learning. But how could they go or solve or overcome the challenge if they had no access to internet? It was a right, a basic right, and that inspired to Ameriton Robles, who is a Panamanian poet that wrote something that is beautiful. Said he climbed up to the tree with a cellular, trying to connect with a network of teachers, a great challenge to find other celestial bodies in the blue skies of his notebook. He is well balanced with some pencil, pads, cell phones, and there are other children that they drown in a dream. This demonstrates or is a clear signal that sometimes we operate in a feeling of emptiness. And we said, okay, that needs to be added to the vulnerability of the most vulnerable sectors of society, because we're missing from that. Yes, we know who the actors are: Nubis, Poseidon, Shivas, Buddha, or Jesus. But what may happen if we talk about the choose Warewaibi, Pachamacha, Duracocha, Shemansha, Watala, Shango? I mean, we need to know who these gods or deities are, because the examples have been taken to the movies, and as we don't know the culture, there's emptiness or gaps in customs, in dances, and music, and literature, in world knowledge, and in history. This information is not contained in technology. So countries are making policies without having the right information. We need to develop some opportunities, and the technology team needs to open these kind of spaces, organizing conferences or workshop to develop tools so we can bring together all parties or stakeholders so everybody could be included with their own perspectives. As corporations, we need to see beyond that. Let us see training in technology, having these congresses or workshops, so where the state could play a key role by making laws, statistics that will allow or facilitate to take action. And at the same time, to create infrastructure to protect those stakeholders that are set aside to bring them here, to include them in the technology, in non-discriminatory policies, and as citizens to increase the participation of women, people with disabilities, minorities, of our Aboriginal peoples. Olga knows this full well. We still have power in the digital world. We should have the child power or protection because children share sometimes naturally their personal data on social media and to file the necessary claims. I think that my time is up, right? But I have covered all the content that I intended to convey. These are the concerns and the takeaways that will allow to open further dialogue and bringing these people together, because I'm sure that the stakeholders will provide us with word knowledge, history, know-how, and especially a humanizing factor of the digital world where we want to live. Right now, we will have the Q&A. Do we have 10 minutes? Okay, 10 minutes, and we will take those questions.
I don't know if there are questions from the audience. We do have a question here. Can you introduce yourself? Can you hear me? My name is Lucia from Argentina, and I wanted to ask Lucas if you have an idea of the estimated impact for Argentina if it becomes part of BRICS.
I'm going to reply in English. It's very difficult to foresee now what would be the entire impact of this. It is obvious that it would facilitate enormously trade and governance mechanism that already exists. Let's do not forget that most of the BRICS countries are already some of the main trade partners, for instance, of Argentina, and like Brazil or China, for instance. But in terms of digital policies, I think this would not have any dramatic effect, also because Argentina has already other priorities, like, for instance, reviewing its data protection law in a way that is very compatible with the European framework. So I think it's, in my view, it would be beneficial for Argentina because it would open a new avenue for international debates and potential of strengthening trade and governance agreements with countries that are enormously important already in today's governance and trade dynamics, and will be even more relevant, especially if you think about India and China in the next decade. And hopefully, I really hope also Brazil, hopefully as of next year with a different administration that likely will consider both Latin America and BRICS as top priorities for international governance. Thank you.
Gracias. ¿Alguna otra pregunta? Aquí, por favor, aquí atrás. Si puedes presentarte.
Any other question? Please introduce yourself. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? My name is Monica Gomez from Colombia. My question has to do with data governance. It's kind of difficult to apply it to different areas, for example, from the financial perspective. Nowadays, inequalities may not be considered as regards, for example, gender equality or the gender gap. I don't know if there are regulations or international regulations in which those topics are included, or what should be the main topics or the main steps in order to avoid that. So your question is for Jimena? Yes. Thank you. It's a very good question. It's very relevant. And since the system, the technological system, is guided by the use, of course, it may be possible that this is left out, or the vulnerable groups such as the gender gap is going to be left out. I don't know, in the region, some of our colleagues in Mexico have been working on this, but there is no cybersecurity legislation or guidelines to start having legislation that defines technology with a gender perspective, or including the most vulnerable ones. There is no much bibliography about it, but what we are seeing are different numbers that are starting to show this digital gap. And here I believe that the governments need to start talking about these topics, because when we start including that, the market is going to turn into those topics. And I think that the academia is important here, the civil organization or civil society organizations, that they work together to develop guidelines for gender perspective in order to include it in technology. And it is something that we need to work in. We are kind of a little bit behind at the global level, and I believe that now all of you doing maybe research or something, you have a lot of data in which the digital gap is mentioned as regards health or the financial system and the most vulnerable groups. So we need to start developing this in coordination with companies to start designing the tools that could close that gap and the inequalities that exist. And that should be part of the public agenda. Thank you. Are there any more questions? Two more questions. If you can tell us who you are asking, please. Good afternoon. Thank you. My question is for Jocelyn. My name is Diego Cajade. I'm from Uruguay. I work towards a public policy of inclusion of elder people in the digital technology, and data governance and digital citizenship is something that we have been mentioning a lot, but we need to also minimize risks. So I'm interested in getting to know which are the strategies or what is the experience in the region for the Inter-American Convention of the Rights of Elder People with the Digital Convention. Thanks for your question. I can tell you that from the policies that are being developed in NGOs, which are doing some work on a network in which I participate, we are working on awareness campaigns with elder people. And we have also been doing some work on the judicial automated system so that there's a visibility of seniors, for example, there. Because, for example, when there's a legal process that may extend in time, we need to make it more, or we need to improve it so that it can help the specific group that you are talking about. I don't know if there are any other experiences as regards to that, but I believe that it is a group that is vulnerable and that is being left out. And we need to work on that because they are vulnerable as regards technology, and we need to help them and to be more sympathetic towards that group as regards technology. I hope that I answered your question, but to my knowledge, there are not too many experiences as regards that. In the NGOs that I've been involved with, we have been talking about doing some work as regards that. I think that Costa Rica is also working in those tools that I mentioned. Now we're going to have the last question from Honduras. Can you introduce yourself? My name is Sandy Palma. I'm from Honduras, and this is a question for all of you, actually. Which do you believe is the main challenge in the region as regards data protection in our countries for the government sector as well as for the private sector? I would like Danilo to answer this question because he's an expert on personal data protection and he visited Argentina recently. I don't know, Danilo, if you can help us with that question. Yes, Karina, thank you. That's kind of a difficult answer. There's a situation in which there's been a lot of debate on the standards on data protection in many countries, Brazil, for example, and also as regards the general clauses for personal data transfer and the Ibero-American network that now is being suggested as something that the countries in Latin America may include in their legislation, a kind of a regulatory harmonization among countries in the region as regards data protection. For example, today, the GPA conference program was published that is going to be held in Turkey in November, and there's a public session specifically for that. And I believe that is important because data transfer may be something that is always being talked about. And the flow of data between Europe and the US, that is the biggest in the world, has been on the discussion for 10 years. They are talking about rules and regulations that are not enough. And it would be interesting, not only for integration of Latin American countries, but also as a precedent for harmonization that could be important at the global level. And that is something that I would pay attention to next year. And if we are able to transform a Latin American standard, maybe that could be the first part of a big integration in other parts of the world. Thank you, Danilo. And now we're going to finish this panel. We are on time. I want to thank all our members of the panel, Danilo, Donena, Luca Belli, coordinator of the Society and Technology Center, FGV Brazil, Jimena Moreno, professor of CIDE Mexico, and Jocelyn Von Castro, president of Apandetec Panama. Thanks to all of you, and a round of applause for you.